Let me tell you something that most people get completely wrong about strength. They think strength is loud. They picture it as the person standing on the stage, trophy in their hands, crowd cheering, the confident smile, the polished story, the highlight reel that everyone sees and says, I want that. But here's what I know. After years of studying people who built truly extraordinary lives, real strength is almost never loud. Real strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wait for applause. It doesn't need an audience. And it is almost never born in the comfortable moments of life. It is born in the painful ones. Not just any pain. Not the kind you perform. Not the kind you broadcast so that people can tell you how sorry they are. I'm talking about a different kind altogether. I'm talking about the kind of suffering that happens in silence. And here's what I want you to understand today. The person who learns to do that, the person who learns to carry their weight quietly, to process their pain privately, to keep building when nobody is watching, that person becomes something the world is rarely prepared for. That person rises every single time. Here's the thing about the world we live in right now. Everything is public. Everything is a performance. You fall down, and within minutes, the culture around you is whispering, share it, post about it, let people know what you're going through, get ahead of it, control the narrative. And I understand that. I really do. There's something deeply, deeply human about wanting to be heard, about wanting someone to look at the weight you are carrying and say, I see it. I get it. You're not alone. That's not weakness. That's humanity. But here's what nobody is telling you. When you take your pain and turn it into a performance, when your suffering becomes a story you tell for reactions, for sympathy, for the comfort of being understood, you make a trade. You trade the power of transformation for the temporary warmth of being heard. And sympathy, as kind as it feels in the moment, does not build you. Sympathy keeps you comfortable inside the pain. It gives the pain a place to live. It makes the pain feel appropriate, expected, even necessary. And when that happens, something very quiet, but very dangerous, begins to occur. You stop looking for the door. Think about the people you know. Maybe you can picture someone right now who are always talking about their problems, always explaining what went wrong, always connecting where they are today to some past difficulty that justifies why they haven't moved. Not people genuinely seeking solutions. Not people asking hard questions and doing the hard work. People who have found comfort in the telling. Now ask yourself honestly, where are those people 5 years later? In most cases, same place, maybe further behind, because the energy that could have gone into growth went into narrating the struggle, and you cannot build and perform at the same time. Now think about someone different. Think about the person you know who went through something genuinely hard, real hard, not surface level hard, and went quiet, disappeared for a season, stopped showing up to every gathering, stopped posting, stopped explaining themselves. And then one day, without much announcement, they came back. But they were different. Something had shifted. The way they carried themselves, the steadiness in their voice, the clarity in their eyes. You couldn't point to exactly what it was, but you could feel it. That quality. That's what I want to talk about today. That's the quality that gets built in the dark, in the silence, in the suffering that nobody else gets to witness. Now, I want to be precise about something here, because I think there's a real misunderstanding about what suffering in silence actually means. It doesn't mean you pretend the pain isn't there. It doesn't mean you bottle everything up and never reach for wisdom or guidance. It's not isolation. It's not shutting yourself away and disappearing into darkness. What it means is this. You refuse to let your pain become your identity. You refuse to let the suffering be louder than your purpose. There's a difference, and this difference changes everything. There's a difference between suffering that breaks you and suffering that builds you. The suffering that breaks you is the suffering you keep returning to, the kind you pick up every single morning and carry into every single conversation, the kind you use to explain why you haven't moved, why things haven't changed, why the life you imagined is still out of reach. That suffering doesn't develop you. It defines you. And being defined by your pain is one of the most quiet and painful forms of a life that never becomes what it was meant to be. The suffering that builds you is entirely different. It's the kind you take into the silence, the pain you sit with, not to stay in it, but to understand it, not to perform it, but to process it, not to make it comfortable, but to let it teach you what it came to teach. And when you learn to engage with your pain that way, when you learn to receive it honestly, examine it clearly, extract what it carries, and then convert it into fuel, you become something the world has very few words for. You become unbreakable. Not because life stops being hard. It won't. Not because the pain stops visiting. It will always visit. But because you've learned the secret that pain carries inside it. Every difficult season of your life is trying to build something in you that ease never could. I want to tell you about a man I once heard about. He had spent more than a decade building a business from nothing. 12 years. 12 years of early mornings when the rest of the world was still asleep. 12 years of saying no to comfort, to leisure, to the ordinary life that most of the people around him were choosing without a second thought. His friends went on vacations he couldn't afford. They bought things he couldn't justify. They slowed down when he couldn't afford to slow down. And the business grew, slowly at first, then steadily. Then with a momentum that began to feel like something real, something lasting, something worth every sacrifice that had been made to build it. And then, in the space of about 18 months, a series of circumstances, most of them outside his control, began to pull the foundation apart. An industry shift he hadn't anticipated. A partnership that broke down in ways that were painful and complicated. A market that changed faster than he could adapt to. Within 2 years, what had taken 12 years to build was gone. The financial security, gone. The professional identity he had wrapped himself in for over a decade, gone. The future he had planned with such care and such sacrifice, gone. And in that silence after the collapse, most of the people who had been present during the building were no longer present. Not because they were bad people. People simply find it uncomfortable to be close to visible failure. It asks too much of them. And so, gradually, quietly, they stepped back. He was left with very little. And he was left largely alone. Now here is the moment I want you to pay close attention to. Because this is the moment that determines everything. A person in that position has 2 roads. The first road is the one most people choose. They become loud. They explain what happened. They assign responsibility. They build the case. They find the people who will listen, and they tell the story again and again until the story becomes more real to them than the present moment. And in the short term, it feels like relief. Finally, someone understands. Finally, someone sees the difficulty. But in the long term, that road leads nowhere new because your energy is finite. And every unit of energy you spend constructing the narrative of what happened to you is a unit of energy you are not spending on building what comes next. This man chose the second road. He went quiet, not defeated, not broken, not resigned. Quiet in the most deliberate, purposeful sense of the word. He made a decision, not with words, not with announcements, but a decision nonetheless. That this season was going to teach him something, and that the teaching required silence. Every morning he rose before the sun came up, not because a book told him to, not because it was fashionable, but because those early hours, that stillness before the world started its noise, those were the hours where he could actually think, where he could sit with what had happened and see it clearly, not through the filter of other people's reactions, not through his own defensiveness, just the raw truth of it, what had worked, what had not, where his judgment had been sound, where it had failed him. Some mornings were very dark. He sat in that silence and felt the full weight of everything he had lost, and it was heavy. But he stayed. He didn't reach for his phone. He didn't turn on the television. He didn't fill the silence with noise. He sat in it, and he let the suffering speak to him. And slowly, so slowly that he couldn't have marked the moment it began, the suffering started to shift. It stopped being a wound he was living inside. It started being a teacher he was learning from. Ideas began coming, quiet ones at first, almost whispers, then louder. A new understanding of the work he actually wanted to do, a clarity about the decisions that had led him here, not to punish himself, but to understand, a direction that had always been there if he was honest, but that the noise had never let him hear clearly enough to follow. He began building again, quietly, without announcements, without waiting for anyone's excitement or approval. 3 years later, what he had built from the ruins of that collapse was, by any honest measure, more significant than what had been lost. Not just financially, in terms of wisdom, in terms of character, in terms of the quality of the man he had become on the other side of that silence. And when people looked at what he had built and wanted to call it luck, he simply smiled, because he knew the truth. The truth lived in the silence. In the mornings, nobody witnessed. In the suffering, nobody applauded. In the long, invisible, difficult season when he was not performing recovery for an audience, but actually recovering, he suffered in silence. And in that silence, he found everything. Now, I want to share something with you. Something I believe is one of the most important principles available to any person who is serious about building a life that matters. The hard seasons are almost never the worst things that happen to you. They are almost always the most important. When your life is comfortable and stable and everything is moving along as expected, you grow at a certain pace, a steady pace. Sometimes that pace feels satisfying, but there is a ceiling to how high you can rise when your circumstances are easy. Because easy circumstances do not call out everything that is inside you. Only difficult circumstances do that. Think about what happens physically when you push a muscle past its comfortable limit. The muscle fiber tears. There is actual damage. If you could look at that muscle in the moment after something truly difficult, it would not look impressive. It would look stressed, broken in a technical sense. But the body's response to that damage is extraordinary. A repair process activates. A rebuilding process begins. And when that process is complete, the muscle is not just restored to what it was before. It is stronger. It is more capable. It is more resilient. Your character works the same way. When life pushes you past your comfortable limit, when the pain exceeds what you thought you could handle, something in you breaks. But if you remain in the silence, if you don't numb the pain, if you don't perform the pain, if you let it do what it came to do, what gets rebuilt is not just restored. It is stronger. It is wiser. It carries a quality that you simply cannot manufacture any other way. This is why, when you study the lives of people who have built something truly lasting, something that doesn't depend on luck or timing or favorable conditions, you will find a common thread. Almost all of them passed through something hard. Almost all of them went through a season where the ground shifted, where the plan fell apart, where the support they expected wasn't there. And the ones who came out the other side were not the ones who suffered the least. They were the ones who chose to suffer in the most productive way, in silence, with intention, with the decision made quietly, kept privately, that what was happening to them was going to be converted into something, not just endured, converted. Because enduring is passive. It says, I will get through this. But converting is active. It says, this is going to build something in me. And there is an enormous difference between getting through something and getting something from it. Let me tell you about a young woman I once came across. She was in her mid-20s, working at a company she had given 4 years of her life to. She worked harder than most of the people around her, stayed late when others left early, brought ideas to the table that more senior people hadn't thought of. She was building toward a promotion that felt, by any reasonable measure, like the obvious next step. And it went to someone else. In that moment, every voice around her said the same thing. Tell someone. Make this known. It's unfair, and people should know it's unfair. She felt all of it. The sting. The quiet humiliation of being passed over when you know, in the private place where you are most honest with yourself, that you deserved it. But she made a choice. A quiet one. An unannounced one. She decided that what had happened to her was not going to set the ceiling for where she was going. She stopped performing the disappointment, and she started building in the silence. Every evening, when the office emptied and the building went quiet, she stayed. Not to be seen. Not to demonstrate anything to anyone. She stayed because she had decided that if the world was not going to recognize her where she was going to develop herself until recognition became unavoidable. She studied. She learned the parts of the business that most of her colleagues had never bothered to understand. She sought out the thinking of people who had built what she wanted to build. Not in formal settings, not by asking anyone for anything, but by reading everything she could find, listening to everything she could access, and thinking deeply about what she was learning. For 2 years, almost nothing visible happened. 2 years of growth with no applause. 2 years of investment with no visible return. 2 years of building in the dark, trusting a process she could not yet see the outcome of. And then, gradually, undeniably, a shift began. The quality of her thinking started to show. The depth of her understanding became difficult to ignore. The confidence she carried, not the performed kind, but the genuine kind, the kind that comes from actually knowing your own capabilities. That confidence started to speak for itself. Within 6 months, she had not merely received the promotion she had originally been passed over for. She had moved 2 full levels above it. And people looked at her and wanted to call it sudden. But she knew. It wasn't sudden. It was 2 years of silence. 2 years of suffering quietly through the sting of being overlooked. 2 years of choosing to build when she could have chosen to complain. The world saw the harvest. The world never saw the planting. And the harvest was extraordinary, precisely because of the depth of the roots. I want you to sit with something now. In nature, nothing truly powerful is built quickly. Nothing extraordinary is assembled in a single dramatic moment. Think about the way a diamond is created, deep underground, in absolute darkness, under pressure that is almost incomprehensible. Over time, that dwarfs any human schedule or timeline. No light, no audience, no recognition, just pressure and time, and the slow, invisible transformation of one thing into something else entirely. And then one day, it is brought to the surface, and everyone who sees it says, beautiful. But not one of those people was there for the pressure. Not one of them witnessed the darkness. Not one of them saw the time. They see only the result. Now, you may be in the pressure right now. You may be in the darkness. You may be in a season where you cannot see the light from where you are standing, and the timeline feels completely beyond what you thought you could endure. If that is where you are, I want you to hear this very clearly. You are not failing. You are forming. The pressure you are under in this season is not evidence that you were wrong to try. It is not evidence that the dream was too large, that the goal was unrealistic, that you were foolish to believe in yourself. It is not punishment. It is not bad luck. It is the forge. And things that are being forged do not look impressive while the forging is happening. Steel does not look beautiful in the fire. It looks like it is being destroyed. It looks painful, uncertain, nothing like what it will eventually become. But the fire is not destroying the steel. The fire is removing everything from the steel that does not belong there. The impurities, the weaknesses, the inconsistencies that were always present but had never been challenged hard enough to become visible. And what remains after the fire is the purest, strongest form of the material. The same is true of you. The suffering you are walking through, if you walk through it in silence, if you let it teach you instead of define you, if you use it as raw material instead of as an excuse, it is not stripping away what is good about you. It is stripping away what was never truly you in the first place. The small stories you built around your limitations, the excuses you made comfortable, the version of yourself that was manageable, but was never the full picture. All of that is being burned away. And what remains? If you stay, if you keep building in the dark, if you trust what you cannot yet see, what remains is the real version of you, the complete version, the one that was always there, waiting to be uncovered by exactly this kind of season. Think about the oak tree. Before an oak tree is visible above the ground, before a single branch, before a single leaf, before there is any evidence at all that something extraordinary is growing, the roots are already going deep. For months, all the work is underground, invisible. The tree is investing everything into the foundation, into the depth of the roots that will hold it steady through every storm that comes. And someone walking past that patch of ground sees nothing, but something is happening. Something remarkable and irreversible is happening. That is the nature of real growth. Real growth is usually invisible, long before it becomes undeniable. And the suffering you walk through in silence is building roots inside you that the world cannot see yet. Roots of resilience, roots of wisdom, roots of character, and one day, not in some distant, theoretical future, but in a future that is closer than it feels right now. Something in your life will shift. Something will emerge above the surface, and people will look at it and not understand where it came from. They will search for the obvious explanation. The lucky break, the right timing, the advantage they can't quite identify. They will call it luck. But you will know the truth. You will know about the silence. You will know about the mornings nobody else saw. You will know about the suffering you chose to carry quietly and convert into something powerful. And that knowledge, that private, unshakable understanding of what it actually cost to build what you built, that is one of the most profound satisfactions available to a human being. Because you know it is real. You know it is earned. And you know that nothing and no one can take from you what was built in the silence. Because what is built in the silence belongs to you completely. Let me ask you something directly now. Right now, in this moment, what are you suffering through that you have been broadcasting instead of building through? What pain have you turned into a performance? What struggle have you been narrating for an audience? Explaining, justifying, sharing, when that same energy could have been building something that actually moved you forward? I'm not asking you to be harsh with yourself. I'm asking you to be honest, because honesty is the door that opens everything else, and you cannot walk through a door you refuse to see. Here is a question I want you to really sit with. If nobody was watching, if there were no social media platforms, no followers, no comments, no people to tell your story to, what would you do differently? Would you still be standing in the same place? Or would something inside you find a way to move? Because if the main thing keeping you in the suffering is the audience you have built around it, that is one of the most clarifying things you can discover about yourself. And if that question lands somewhere uncomfortable, if a part of you recognizes that you have been performing the pain instead of processing it, please understand something. That recognition is not a condemnation. That recognition is the beginning of change. Because you cannot change what you have not yet been willing to honestly see. And right now, you are seeing it. So what do you do with it? Here is what I know about the people who build lives that last. They are not the loudest people in the room. They are almost always the quietest. They have learned something that most people spend their entire lives running from. They have learned to be genuinely alone with themselves, to sit in the silence of their own situation, without the noise of other people's opinions, without the comfort of constant distraction, and to not run from what they find there. They sit. And in the sitting, something begins to happen. Clarity arrives. Not immediately, not loudly, but it arrives. Decisions that felt impossible become clearer. Priorities that had been buried under noise become obvious. The path that was hidden under all the distraction begins to reveal itself, one honest step at a time. Because wisdom does not shout. Wisdom whispers. And you cannot hear a whisper in a crowded, noisy room. You can only hear it in the silence. So I'm asking you again, what do you need to stop broadcasting? And what do you need to start building? Quietly, deliberately, without waiting for anyone's permission or anyone's applause? That answer may be the most important thing you discover this year. I want to do something with you before we close today. I want you to picture yourself 10 years from now, 10 years older, 10 years further down the road, 10 years on the other side of this exact moment you're sitting in right now. And I want you to see two different versions of that person. The first version is the one who, when this difficult season came, chose noise over silence, who told the story of their suffering so many times that the story became the identity, who let the pain explain everything, every limitation, every ceiling, every reason why the life that was possible was smaller than the life that had been imagined, who found communities of people willing to validate the struggle without ever challenging them to grow through it, who spent 10 years making the pain comfortable. Look at that person. What does their life look like? Where are they standing? What have they built? Are they further along? Or are they standing in the same place, holding the same wounds, telling the same story? Just 10 years older? Now look at the second version. This is the person who, when this difficult season came, chose silence over noise. Not because the pain wasn't real, not because the weight wasn't heavy, but because they made a decision. Quiet, personal, made without any announcement that their suffering was going to become their fuel instead of their identity. This is the person who rose when nobody was watching, who built the skill nobody asked them to build. The person you are becoming is forming in every single daily decision. In every morning you choose to rise before the excuses arrive. In every evening you choose to learn instead of scroll. In every quiet moment you choose to sit with the truth instead of escaping into noise. And I need you to hear this clearly. You have more power over which version of that person you become than you have ever been told. The suffering is not the choice. What you do inside the suffering, that is the choice, and it is entirely yours. I want to leave you with this before we close. Somewhere inside you right now, they are one decision away. Not a dramatic decision, not the kind that gets witnessed and applauded. A quiet one. The kind you make in the dark, before anyone else wakes up, in the honest space between who you have been and who you are becoming. The decision to stop performing your pain and start converting it into power. The decision to stop waiting for someone to rescue you. It is the raw material of something that only you can build, that only your specific suffering could have produced, that only your particular journey through this particular darkness could have forged into being. You do not need to be further along to begin. You do not need better circumstances to start. You do not need permission from anyone who has not walked the road you are walking. You need only the courage to be quiet when everything in you wants to be loud, the discipline to keep building when nobody sees, the faith to trust that what is growing in the silence will one day become undeniable in the light. Suffer in silence, rise in strength, not because it is easy. Not because the road is short, but because you were built for exactly this, and somewhere ahead of you, not as far as it feels, not as distant as the darkness makes it seem. The version of you that came through this is waiting to thank you for not quitting, waiting to thank you for choosing the silence when it would have been so much easier to fill it with noise, waiting to thank you for deciding in this moment that your story is not finished. Your best chapter is still ahead, and it begins in the quiet. It begins right now. Stay with us here at Jim Rohn Heritage, because this is only the beginning of what you are capable of becoming.